while everyone is distracted by the speakers fight, and it really does feel like Groundhog Day. I mean, every day we come in and I'm like, please, can we move on? What is the big story of the day? And the big story of the day continues to be this. We do have to figure out the fights ahead, and we know what the fights ahead are going to be. And while many people are complaining about this conservative rebellion of 20 against McCarthy, they've actually helped mitigate some of the existential crises moving forward with this deal. Now, how does this actually work? Well, we know or have good guesses of when the debt ceiling will need to be increased. And we know that by October, they will have to fund the government. So with those on the calendar now and the House Republicans agreeing to a rule that they will actually vote on the 12 appropriations measures and they will prioritize structuring and passing the appropriations measures above all other things, that prevents those crises from building as much as they would. There's still going to be problems when we get to October, and there are still going to be problems with the debt ceiling ultimately. Conservatives won't want to go along with that. Democrats will, of course, be required to weigh in, probably, more likely than not, depending on the structures of the terms. At the same time, however, because Chip Roy has forced the House Republican leaders to abandon the process of governing by crisis, this actually helps get those off the table. It frees up time for the other crises. One of the crises will be Ukraine. House Republicans are not as willing as House Democrats to fund Ukraine. The moderate House Republicans and the moderate House Democrats together are willing to fund Ukraine. Depending on how many seats on the Rules Committee conservatives get out of this deal, particularly fiscal conservatives, it could make it harder to fund Ukraine. The Senate, however, is insistent on funding Ukraine and has the votes to fund Ukraine, and they will tie funding Ukraine to anything. There will be an intra-congressional fight between the two houses, a bicameral fight. Now, you do need to understand that the view of most senators and the view of most congressmen, despite their antagonism towards each other, and by the way, there is real antagonism towards each other. A lot of these people, even on the Republican side, don't like each other. I happen to like a lot of the people in the House who don't like each other. It always puts me in an awkward position. But they actually view each other as opponents. Now, you can have Dan Crenshaw out there calling his Republican colleagues terrorists right now, but they view each other as opponents. The Senate is the enemy. And in the Senate, they're opponents against each other, and the House is the enemy. That bicameral rivalry happens to bring people together. And the Senate doesn't care what the House does on Ukraine. The Senate is going to fund Ukraine, and that's going to put a bicameral fight there. By the way, there is at this very moment, as I'm talking, some breaking news for those of you in Georgia. Andrew Clyde has just voted for Kevin McCarthy. He has, in the last 11 votes, refused to vote for McCarthy. This gets closer and closer to that deal. Michael Cloud has just voted for McCarthy as well. For those of you in Texas, Michael Cloud from Texas has, for 11 votes, voted against McCarthy. So you've got Andrew Clyde, Andrew Clyde, Michael Cloud, Dan Bishop, and one other have now switched their votes to McCarthy already, headed in his direction as predicted, which means it looks like they're getting close to being comfortable on the deal, and these are good faith votes showing that they will move in his direction. You may be able to get some of these people who have said they'd vote no to vote present, therefore their votes wouldn't count, or they would take a walk off the floor so they wouldn't have to do it. Gaetz will stand there and vote no, and Gaetz will marginalize himself. And you actually probably won't see a big complaint if Gaetz is removed from some committees as a result. He's not getting anything in the deal. And from what I know of some of the conservatives behind the scenes, they're deeply antagonized by Gaetz right now as well, and they won't care when he gets punished. That's happening right now. Andrew Clyde and Michael Cloud, Dan Bishop have all voted now for McCarthy. Now back to the fights. The border is going to be another fight. The border is going to be a really big fight. In the next hour, I want to spend some time on the border. Joe Biden, the president, spoke yesterday. Remember that guy? We've been so focused on the House. The president's kind of gotten a pass by everybody. He really hasn't done much in the past few days, but yesterday he gave a press conference, and he did talk about the border. He did talk about the situation there. He did talk about the Supreme Court pausing repeal of Title 42, but I don't think he really has a firm grasp on it. Here's Joe Biden.
Vice President, I'd like to talk to you about how my administration is dealing with our situation on the southwest border.
The southwest border. Notice how he's framing that. It's very interesting. The southwest border, as opposed to just the southern border or the border, it's the southwest border. Very particular terminology used there that is deliberate and suggests he views this as just a small problem on the southwest border of the country, not our entire southern border. Meanwhile, while this is happening, the drug cartels in Mexico have escalated a fight with the Mexican military. They've been firing 50 caliber weapons at airplanes. Now, for perspective, I actually know some. Philip and I know something about this. We do. So when I go to Las Vegas, there's a group, you can Google them, Bullets and Burgers, or Burgers and Bullets. They have a gun range. Not only do they have a gun range, they have a monster track, and they'll ride you around in one of the monster trucks. But if you ever go out to Las Vegas with your family and you want to do something fun with the family, you can go to Bullets and Burgers and you can shoot machine guns in the desert. And not just machine guns, they have different weapons for you to play around with. And one of the guns you get to shoot is a Barrett 50 caliber weapon. Now, here's what they tell us about this weapon when we go out there. You have to be at least 50 miles from an airport in order to fire the Barrett. Not only that, you have to be approved in your pattern of firing, because as they showed us, there's a town 4 miles from the gun range. And if they aim the gun too high, the bullets could land in that town 4 miles away. It's so powerful. So they have it calibrated so that you can fire it and feel it, but it's calibrated so it doesn't go higher than a bunker that it's built into. When we want to, they allow you to shoot it at targets that are filled with tannerite, and so they explode on impact. It's really a lot of fun. It really is. But we do this, and they were talking about the parameters of that. It's got to be 50 miles from major airport that has regular commercial traffic, and it's because it's 4 miles from a town, it's got to be calibrated in such a way to restrain where the bullets can actually go. It's got to be locked into a particular position. So they have 50 caliber weapons that the cartels are shooting because El Capo's son has been arrested, and they're fighting back. The border is going to escalate into a conflict in Mexico, which is a failed drug state. Mexico is a failed state, whether you want to believe it or not. The White House doesn't take that seriously. They're afraid they'll be called racist for calling it a failed state. That's going to be one of the major fights. Mexico, Ukraine, the border, the drug war south of the border, the fentanyl crisis, all of these things play together with national security and defense spending. And part of the deal that McCarthy has agreed to with these conservatives is to restrict defense spending to 2022 levels. Now, why? If you talk to the conservatives, they say that this actually would force the Pentagon, if the Pentagon is serious about defense, to get rid of a lot of duplicative services, waste, fraud, and abuse. They would still have plenty of money to build plenty of weapon systems, develop new weapon systems, but that cut would force them to do an evaluation and an audit so that they can still spend money on our national defense. Now, whether or not the Pentagon does that is on them, and that'll be on the president, not on Congress. Congress, though, wants to restrain some of the spending. This is actually not a bad thing. So it's going to be interesting to watch how these fights shape up, but those are the big ones. The border is going to be the big fight. Ukraine's going to be a big fight. The debt and spending, because of the deal that Chip Roy has gotten, will still be fights, but less so than these other things. Republicans believe they have a winning issue when it comes to the border, and now this cascading crime problem in Mexico that spills over to our border is something they're going to want to deal with, that the Biden administration has never been serious about. And now suddenly even the Biden administration realizes they have to get serious about the border issue now that Republicans are in charge. Why? Because Republicans can now hold hearings in the House and bring in Customs and Border Patrol and have them give the eyewitness accounts of just how bad it's gotten.